Hello and welcome to our next unit of information regarding program design for resistance training. Within this course, the idea is you really get a taste of what's going to come up in EXS130 as well as EXS216. The idea behind even the careers, even opening up your eyes and the opportunities of possibly becoming a personal trainer or group trainer, and even a strength and conditioning coach. There are certain certification organizations that would be more on the preferred list, so everything from ACE, ACSM, NSCA, and ASM. If you have any questions on any of these, I would highly recommend checking the internet to kind of see what the internet says about them and how they can fit along with what your goals are. So to start, we're going to be talking about the principles of strength training and programming. So ultimately, there's variables that should be followed, and depending on what an individual's goal, can be changed. So to begin, a needs analysis, there's exercise selection, training frequency, exercise order, training load and repetitions, volume, as well as rest period. And we're going to go through each one of these now. So for step one, needs analysis. It's really a two-stage process that includes both an evaluation of the requirements and characteristics of the sport, or whatever really the client goals are, and the assessment of that individual. That way you can also find out where their weaknesses are so that you can better attain their goals. You can also work on the evaluation of the sport specifically. So for an athlete, of course, there's going to be different specifications regarding what they're really looking for. So you want to go through a movement analysis, there's physiological analyses, as well as an injury analysis. If at any point throughout this presentation you want to pause, you want to read through everything, I'm just going to make sure that I fill in any gaps that might be there. So after that, finally, the assessment of the actual athlete. So their training status, what type of training program, the length of recent regular participation, kind of the idea of a needs analysis is really getting a baseline information. Who's coming to us? What do they need? Where do we need to get them? That can go through physical testing, the evaluation, and then ultimately figuring out their primary resistance training goals. From those aspects, that's what several of the other steps will actually touch on regarding frequency, intensity, etc. Because depending on what those ultimate goals are via strength, power, hypertrophy, etc., it will change how the workout looks. So as an example, when we are talking sport specific, there's an idea behind off-season, pre-season, in-season, and of course post-season, talking about active rest. When you look through, so it's priority is given during sport practice or priority is resistance training, then it talks about goals. Take a moment, read through this slide, and continue when you're ready. So step two, we're going to talk about exercise selection. So choosing exercises for a resistance training program requires knowing one, the movement and muscular requirements of the sport, an athlete's exercise technique experience, equipment available, and really the amount of time you have with that individual. So when we're thinking of exercise type, everything from core exercises, there's also assistance exercises, so recruiting the smaller muscle areas rather than the prime movers. Then we also want to talk about movement analysis of that sport. So we're going back to sport specific. Am I going to train a swimmer the same as I would train a baseball player? Of course not. So the principle that we would want to look at is the SAID principle. So it's specific adaptation to imposed demands. Depending on what that athlete needs, that's more where that training program should fall into. And here's some movement patterns. So if an athlete, they need ball dribbling and passing skills, if they need to ball, kick the ball, rowing, running, etc., then it gives you some examples of related exercises that would be ideal for that athlete. So movement analysis of that sport, figuring out muscle balance, making sure that we are creating a workout that's both hitting the agonist as well as the antagonist. I'm not trying to do all quads all day, every day. I have to make sure that I get those hamstrings in there. I have to make sure that I get some glutes, working those synergists, working the accessory and the stabilizer muscles as well. And then the next step is going to be training frequency. Frequency is the number of training sessions completed in a given time period. It can be a week, it can be off season. That is how often that individual is going to be following this program. So again, depending on what their training status is. So training status affects the number of rest days needed between sessions. A frequency of 3 workouts per week is recommended for many athletes to allow sufficient recovery between sessions. So as an example, depending on what level of activity an individual is, beginner, intermediate, or advanced, it gives guidelines regarding how many sessions per week. Then we also have training status. So more highly resistance trained individuals, so intermediate or advanced athletes, can actually augment their training by using a split routine in which different muscle groups are trained on different days. Again, pause this if you'd like. This is just an example of a common split routine, talking about, training day 1, 2, possibly 3 for that week, what days we're resting, what muscle groups we work on, and that way we'll be able to work out more days, but separating the muscle groups that we would be working out each day. And then exercise order. So once we've selected the exercise, we have to figure out what order are we going to put them in. So again, depending on their goals, power, other core, then assistance exercises should ideally be first, then followed by other non-power or core exercises, and then following up with the assistance exercises. Upper and lower body exercises typically should be alternated for one style. If the exercises are performed with minimal rest periods, this method is also referred to as a circuit training workout. Then you also have the idea of push-pull method. This is where you will alternate pushing exercises with pulling exercises back to back within the same workout. And then you also have supersets and compound sets. A lot of individuals do utilize the push-pull. A lot of individuals also use the idea behind the compound set. Sometimes we call them supersets, but in fact, we're usually doing a compound set. A compound set involves sequentially performing 2 different exercises for the same muscle group. Then we also have the superset, which is doing opposing muscles. Some terms to pay attention to and to understand when we are going to be looking at intensity as well as repetitions and sets, understanding what load is, what 1 RM equals, and then also RM as a term that you might see within literature. So step 5 is talking about those training loads and repetitions. So it's assigning the load or the resistance amount and the repetitions based on the goal. So thinking of repetition maximum continuum, using a relatively heavy load if the goal is strength or power, using moderate loads for hypertrophy, using light loads for muscular endurance. So depending on where you are on that continuum, the heavier you are, the more your goals are strength and power. The lighter you are, typically for muscular endurance. This kind of gives that as an image. So when we are looking at the repetitions on the bottom, working on higher reps, muscular endurance. Working on lower reps, depending on the training goal, you will also have that strength and power. So notice the letters get larger. This is more where the focus is. Lighter resistance is towards the left as well. So lighter resistance, I apologize, heavier resistance is going to be on the left, lighter resistance, etc. So ideally, we want to have moderate resistance for hypertrophy, light resistance for lighter resistance for muscular endurance, and heavier resistance when it comes to power and strength. So assigning the load and repetitions based on the training goal, percentage of a 1 rep max. This is something that you can attain depending on the goals of the athlete, and being able to utilize a percentage of that 1 rep max in order to devise a program specifically from that number. And this is how you would try to find within this percentage of that 1 rep max, depending again on that goal. So if they have a strength goal, looking at that 1 rep max, you would want equal or greater than 85% of that 1 rep max. So if their 1 rep max was 100 pounds, you would want at least 85 pounds or above in order to do 6 or less repetitions. That would be how you would work on strength. And looking at muscular endurance, you would look at that same 100 pounds, 1 rep max. You would lift less than or equal to 67 pounds, but lift greater than or equal to 12 reps in order to work on muscular endurance. If you, again, you'd like to stop and read everything, please do so. So when we're looking at step 6, for volume, this is talking primarily for resistance training goals when we're talking either hypertrophy or we are talking muscular endurance. So for hypertrophy, the definition increases in muscle size associated with higher training volumes. Muscular endurance talks about endurance is increased involved with many repetitions, either per set, light loads, and usually fewer sets. So it would be a smaller volume. And this is looking at volume assignments based on the training load. So the goal rep and the sets. When we're thinking of volume, volume is reps times sets. And that way you can see how many total reps that you've performed for a specific exercise. And step 7, we have rest periods. So with the rest periods, it's not just taking a 5-second break, it's having a recovery period between sets and exercises. It is really meant to give you a rest and recovery so that depending again on what your goal is, it will give you enough time to recover to either give an all-out effort if you're working on power and strength, or less recovery if you're working on muscular endurance because you're trying to challenge the heart and lungs and the endurance of the muscles. This would be some examples of rest periods. So notice with the strength and power to anywhere between 2 and 5 minutes between sets. And then again, with that muscular endurance, less than 30 seconds. Very similar to say again, how that circuit training workout would be. And if you have any questions regarding any of this information, please let me know. I hope this has been a great help, and I will see you in the chat room.